Welcome back to Star or Shovelware, my name's Luke, and today on the channel we're going to be taking a look at Sol Cresta on the Nintendo Switch. And this one is a new installment in the long-running Cretsta series of games, which originate all the way back to the 1980s arcade scene. Revived by Platinum Games though, Sol Cresta looks to continue the storyline and expand on the original gameplay formula, elevating its unique docking mechanics. But how did the developers of titles such as Bayonetta and Nier Automata fare with their first venture into the genre, and can they do justice to this SHMUP classic? Well, hit that like button, subscribe for more Switch reviews and content, and let's find out. So if like me you never played the original Cretsta games, those being Moon Cresta and Terra Cresta, Sol Cresta kindly recaps the events of these games via a classic introductory scrolling wall of text. Now the story of this series concerns the invasion of the solar system by the Mandler army and humanity's attempts to defend against the assault through a series of special defense operations. The first of these was Moon Cresta, aimed at destroying the Mandler's army fortress on the moon, which unfortunately failed, resulting in the Earth falling to the invading forces. In an attempt to take back the Earth Recovery Army, Terra Cresta, was formed, but again this second attempt failed, and a further invasion eventually saw the sun fall into the Mandler army, pushing humanity back to the edges of the solar system. And so now this is where the Solar Recovery Army, Sol Cresta, come in, with their mission being a last-ditch attempt to take back the solar system and defeat the Mandler army once and for all. Now aside from the intro text, the standard version of Sol Cresta contains no further development of the storyline, and much like a classic arcade shmup, its levels are played one after another with no narrative elements included. If however you do want a more narrative driven gameplay experience, well then you're gonna have to pay an extra $10 for the dramatic edition of the game, which features all of the additional story elements. And to be honest, I do think this is a little bit cheeky to say the least. The game already has a premium price tag, likely due to Platinum Games being more of a high profile studio, but I personally think that these story elements should have come as standard, with the option of turning them on and off in game, and I only had access to the base version of the game, so there's really nothing else I can say in terms of its storyline. So gameplay with this one then, and Sol Cresta follows the format of most vertical scrolling shmups in that you traverse the level travelling upwards instead of left to right, fighting enemies as you go, with levels eventually culminating in a series of boss battles. Each of the levels in the game is themed after a planet in the solar system, with the final level taking place at the sun, and I thought there was some decent variety to them, with many of the levels requiring you to avoid environmental hazards such as moving walls or spikes which erupt from the planet's surface. I did however have a little difficulty distinguishing between which of the elements were collidable and which were just background visuals, and sometimes the colour scheme of the levels made it difficult to see enemy projectiles, but overall they didn't cause too many issues. Now when it comes to the game's control scheme, here's where the game's unique docking mechanics come into play, as instead of piloting an individual ship through levels, you're actually in control of 3 different ships, which all have names, but for simplicity's sake I'll just designate them red, blue and yellow. While the game does have a cool looking old school instruction manual to direct you on how its mechanics actually work, they did take me a while to fully understand them, but here's a simple rundown of how they work. So your 3 ships are initially docked or connected together, with the frontmost ship determining the type of projectiles that you shoot, and enemies have weaknesses to one of the 3 types, so you frequently need to switch between them to exploit these weaknesses. To do this, you're able to undock and control the ships as a linked group, rotating the desired ship to the front before redocking, but you also have access to a series of special formations, indicated by the coloured icons in the bottom left of the screen. Now to activate these you must have first acquired the appropriate chip found as drops from enemies and from within containers. Next you need enough soul power seen as the rings above the formation icons, and finally you must manoeuvre the ship into the formation seen on the icons before holding the dock button down, and this will then lock them into that position for a short period of time, granting them more powerful offensive capabilities with which to annihilate the enemy with. Now I thought this new freeform docking mechanic put a great spin on the classic formula, bringing more variety and strategy to the game, and the abilities that they provide really makes a difference when fighting bosses. However, actually getting your ships into the correct formation can be pretty difficult due to you constantly dodging on-screen projectiles or other hazards in levels, and while gameplay is purposefully slowed down while undocked, it's still pretty tricky. Now I played the game on very easy mode and went into the options and bumped up the number of lives I started with, but despite this the game is still pretty challenging. The enemies in Sol Cresta range from your classic fighter ships which fly in formation and static turrets which shoot at you, to much larger battleships which kind of act like mini boss battles, and the difficulty level seems to affect both the number of projectiles that these enemies fire as well as their overall quantity. Now, as an incentive to actually taking down these enemies as opposed to just dodging them, in addition to earning points towards your high score, the game also promotes taking down as many enemies as you can through the tokens that they drop on death, each of which goes towards filling the power bar on the right side of the screen, which unlocks additional attacks, increases your max SP meters or shields, and upgrades your attack power. All in all though, I found that there was a decent amount of depth to the game's mechanics, and it felt much more involved than some of the other shmups that I've played, primarily thanks to the freeform docking system. I do feel though that this is something that will be received with mixed responses, as it does make gameplay feel more engaging, but I'd also say that it raises the skill cap for the game, adding to its complexity, and you really do need to become proficient with the system before tackling the harder difficulties. The game's bosses though are not that difficult, at least not on easy mode. The level of bullet hell is nowhere near as much as with other shmups I've played, and several bosses feature repeating mechanics, with additional phases added on each time that you face them, which does mean the difficulty curve on them is nice and gradual. Now the game has 7 levels in total, and I'd say that each of them takes around 8 minutes to complete, which in itself isn't a huge amount of bang for your buck. There are however a couple of other modes to unlock, including Caravan mode, which gives you 5 minutes to rack up as many points as possible, and Score Attack mode, where you aim for a high score on each of the game's levels, and both of these include online leaderboards for those of you looking for a bit of competition. If you're looking for more of a challenge, there are a couple of extra difficulty levels unlocked after completing the game on normal mode, though I honestly don't have the skill nor the patience for such a feat. Overall though, I've played quite a few shmups on the Switch, and I'd definitely say this is one of the more enjoyable ones and features some of the most unique gameplay mechanics I've seen. Whether or not it's worth the $40 price tag really depends on how much you love your shoot 'em ups, but it's worth noting that the game includes Tate mode, which may just tip the scales for all of you hardcore flip grip users out there. So visually I'd say that the sprite work in Sol Cresta is reasonably well done. However, it's not the best looking shmup I've played, and while there is a decent amount of detail into both the enemies and the players' ships, things do tend to look a little blurry and rough around the edges, which may or may not have been intentional. What I will say though is that the developers have gone to the effort of replicating many of the enemies and other hazards from the original games, which works well from a continuity standpoint. However, I did think that the backdrops were a little generic, with them using what look to be digital images, and whose visual aesthetics don't quite match the pixel art of the rest of the game. Audio wise, the game does sound great though. We get some nice sound effects reminiscent of classic shmups which add nicely to its retro appeal, and the game has a solid soundtrack which is great to play along to and matches the high tempo gameplay. So the game performs well on the Switch, which admittedly tends to be the case with most pixel art games, but this type of thing really matters when it comes down to manoeuvring between hails of projectiles and enemies, and I was glad to see no dips in the frame rate throughout my entire playthrough. Issues wise, I've already mentioned that creating formations can be a little tricky, and that the backgrounds can sometimes make it difficult to identify hazards, but other than this, I did at times find that the game resorted to cheap tactics in an attempt to kill you, such as enemies appearing from behind you without any sort of warning, or you being given very little time to react to things like walls, which will instantly kill you if you collide with them, though understandably trial and error often features heavily in this genre, so I can't really complain too much. Other than this though, I think that a few more accessibility settings wouldn't have gone amiss, considering that I only just managed to beat the game on very easy mode, so I think something like unlimited lives or an option to slow the game down a little would prove welcome to newcomers of the genre. Overall though, I thought the devs did a good job with this one. It's got some enjoyable gameplay mechanics, offers a decent level of challenge, and has some amount of replayability with its online leaderboards and multiple difficulty levels. I do however have to take into account its premium price tag and the fact that the story elements come as an additional side purchase, and so when all's said and done, for a rating I'm going to be giving Sol Cresta 3 out of 5 stars. It's good to see the revival of a classic handled with due care and attention, and Platinum Games have done a decent job of expanding on the original formula with their very first venture into the genre. What I will say though is that there are a ton of great shmups out on the Switch, most of which are available for a fraction of the price. And so that about wraps up this review of Sol Cresta on the Nintendo Switch. If it helped you out, make sure to show your appreciation by hitting that like button, share your thoughts and opinions on the game and what your favourite Switch shmups are in the comments section below, and if you watch my content regularly but are not yet subscribed, then please consider doing so. For now though, I just want to thank you all once again for watching, and until next time, take care of yourselves and game on.